As all committee meetings are held in open session and are recorded, and there's a danger that the mobile phones could interfere with the recording session. We don't want any of the wise words that are said by anyone today to go unrecorded for posterity. Remind members to declare any relevant or financial interests in relation to today's business. Both as regards to primary schools and declare an interest as it's primary science teaching and the governor of three primary schools in Bangor. Turning to the agenda, we're aware of Chris Hazard, who, in terms of apologies, who thinks about to become a father for the first time relatively soon. To wish him well. I think it's possibly, I understand, him and his wife are taking a final trip before the Bambino arrives. So apologies from Chris Hazard. Do you have any other apologies? Okay, if no other apologies, then I'll move on to second item, which is Chairman's business. Members, you'll remember that we visited last week Ciara Special School. I think it was a very useful session, not just in terms of the formal setting, but the opportunity to meet the headmaster. I know some of us got a bit of a tour, and it was very eye-opening. I think it's appropriate that we place on the record the committee's thanks to the staff, pupils and principal for their hospitality. And I think if we can, members are happy that we'll write to Ciara in those terms. Everybody agreed in relation to that? Second item of a similar nature, a number of us met yesterday. We had an informal meeting with representatives of St Columbanus College at lunchtime yesterday, and had a very useful discussion with the principal and the chair of the Board of Governors on their experiences of shared education and how it is operated within their schools. Can I seek members' agreement to write to St Columbanus in appreciation of their representatives' attendance? Everybody happy with that? Okay. Third item I have in terms of Chairman's business. NISRA published the school leavers results at GCSE and A-levels, and they've been produced, and I think those have been forwarded on to members. Just to deal with a couple of items in relation to that, I want to note which a number of things that are welcome. There's been an increase of 1.3% in the proportion of school leavers which are attaining 5 good GCSEs, including English and Maths. There's been an increase of 1% of school leavers attaining 3 or more A-levels at the rate of A star to C. There's continuing improvement in GCSE results for non-grammar schools, and a significant fall in the number of school leavers with no qualifications, which I think is something that's very important, and a continuing increase to nearly 70% of Year 12 pupils staying on to study for A-levels. And also, in terms of good news, a steady number, around about 88% of school leavers going on to further education, higher education or training. So I think those are all items that I think that we would welcome. I suppose in terms of the concerns, attainment for children at free school meals at GCSE has remained at 34.9%, which is the same as it was for the previous year's figures of 2012-13. And obviously the PFG target was 45%, with this year's target being 49%. So there's obviously a problem there. On the attainment gap between Protestant and Catholic children on free school meals has widened to about 10%, and the attainment level between boys and girls has widened to 10% at GCSE and 14% at A-level. Now, I would suggest perhaps that the committee, obviously both in the good points and the bad points that we write to the department in relation to the above, and highlight as well the continuing importance of funding literacy and numeracy programme, the extended schools, in order to address, I think the attainment gap is still there for socially, economically deprived children. I suggest we write in those terms to the department. Or members agreed? Any comments just on that? Yes, go ahead. Well, I mean, I suppose the suggestion would be, I suppose, to bring to their attention, they should know it, but just indicate to them that the committee is aware of the results, to highlight, I suppose, where there has been. I think we need to be rounded in this and welcome where there's been successes and highlight those, but particularly also to highlight where there are still areas of concern in terms of the attainment gaps, which have been highlighted by the NISRA report. And also, I think it's it's critical. I suppose there will be various decisions that will have to be taken, but in terms of the literacy and numeracy programme, the extended schools, which are essentially there aiming to address the attainment gap for socio-economic, that we highlight to them the importance of that this isn't a problem. Well, there's been improvements in certain areas. The figures would suggest that in terms of some of the attainment gaps have actually widened, and consequently it's important that we keep on the pressure from the department's point of view to try to do it all it can to actually address those. I think that would be the gist of any letter. I mean, I'm happy for the clerk. I mean, do members want perhaps a letter to be drafted up and then perhaps brought back next week, or do you feel it should be? It's up to members in that regard. Robin.
Chair, I don't particularly want to see a letter that Peter has written. I would have enough confidence in Peter's skills to do that. But maybe just within that, we would be asking the question as to what the intentions of the department is to address the shortfalls, what specifically they want to do.
Actions they intend
to
do?
Yeah, what actions, yeah.
Okay, are members happy enough or content with that as well?
If we could come up with a suggestion of our own, that's really the point of making. We're just commenting on what they already know.
Okay. From that point of view, I suppose our suggestion is at least sort of the continued funding side of it. But do you have anything specific, Trevor, that you want to put in terms of that? Or?
Not off the top of my head, no.
We increase the budget.
Maybe and selection.
Well, I think from that point of view, obviously we can trust Peter to yes, nice try slipping it in that regard, Trevor. If beyond that, if there are any thoughts that people have, I suppose maybe if they could email them to Peter if there's any very specific suggestions in terms of dealing with the attainment gap. Okay, that's all I have by way of Chair's business. Draft minutes, which is at page 6 of your packs from last week. Our members agreed that those are a complete and accurate record. Okay, I'll take acquiescence as agreement, and I'll sign the minutes. Right. I don't have any matters arising. Does anybody have any members of any matters arising? Robin?
I understand you were written to by at least one young person from the
Youth Parliament.
Youth Parliament. And he contacted me on the basis of awaiting a response.
Okay, I think from that point of view, I emailed. I wasn't actually aware whenever I got the email. I wasn't aware it was directly as chair of the committee as opposed to simply as an MLA. Whenever I got the letter,
suggested to me, Chair, that it was as in your role as chair of the committee.
It wasn't 100% clear from that. From that point of view, it had the letter. I can get the. I'll get my tongue.
Just they've written to the committee as well, so we were going to consider it next week.
Okay.
I think it's the
we do have it down in correspondence for next week on it, so perhaps we could deal with it then. I think the nature of the request that the gentleman has brought forward, it shouldn't be anyway particularly controversial. I'd indicated to him, certainly in a personal capacity, I'd be more than happy to write to the local schools in connection with that. But if we can get it formally on the record next week, then in terms of correspondence on that side of it. Okay, if there's no other matters arising, could we check whether the witnesses are they?
They're there.
Okay. Okay, for fair members, our main briefing session then this morning is on the world around us, which is the Primary Teaching Trust briefing. Now, there's a cover note at page 16. It's obviously as well a subject in terms of the issue of primary school science teaching that the ETI had looked at as well. And it highlighted, I think there's also issues around low teacher confidence in terms of science teaching. There's a paper that's been provided by the Primary Science Teaching Trust, which is at page 16 and beyond. And the Education and Training Inspectorate is also due to brief us next week on its review of the world around us. So those are two briefings which will very much sort of fit together. And at this point, okay, we have the observant members will see that there are four, three of which have sort of nameplates in front of them. The fourth doesn't. Maybe just to keep you in suspense. Welcome first of all the following witnesses who are named. We have John Sanford, who's a fellow of the Primary Science Teaching Trust. Leslie Hunter, and she is also a fellow of the Primary Science Teaching Trust. Cathy Schofield, of the College Director of the Primary Science Teaching Trust, and the mystery man at the end is Jim McDade, who presumably is also with the Primary Science Teaching Trust, or whatever. So I'd invite you maybe to make an opening statement, maybe of about 10 minutes, and then members will have the opportunity to ask some questions.
Well, folks, it will be a 5-minute statement because it did say 5 to 10 minutes, so I erred on the side of caution. Good morning. In October last year, I attended a meeting with a group of young and very talented Northern Ireland scientists involved in research at Queen's University. The meeting was in connection with setting up a link with primary schools to enhance their work in science, pupils' work in science. This group is working on a device called microneedles, which will revolutionise how drugs are administered and blood samples are taken. It is painless, completely effective, and eradicates any possibility of contamination through needle stick injuries. We're just 2 years away from full-scale trials, and the health benefits and economic potential are absolutely enormous. However, when asked by the primary school teachers how many high-spec manufacturing jobs this was likely to bring to our community, we received a very blunt answer: none. We were told that Northern Ireland is just not geared up to produce this in sufficient scale, with a sufficiently STEM-skilled workforce to do it. We can invent it, but we can't cash in on it. The skills shortage that we face in STEM, and particularly in science-based industries now, is, I feel, a direct result of failure to act upon the warnings of those who have come before us. If we repeat the mistake of previous generations, I'm afraid someone a bit like me will sit in front of a group of people a bit like you in another 10 years' time and decry not only the fact that we failed to prepare our economy for the science revolution that we will have largely missed out upon, but possibly have lost the existing STEM-based industries due to lack of ability to recruit sufficiently. Relevant data, such as that you've been supplied with in the document I made available earlier, points overwhelmingly to the fact that scientists are not made at universities or even secondary schools, but in their primary school classes. If the correct foundation is not constructed at primary level, then we will not be able to build a robust educational system which will deliver the STEM needs for our future economy. And the bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, is we are not doing enough to ensure that this does happen at primary level. Several organisations have suggested a much enhanced role for science and technology in the Northern Ireland economy during the next 5 to 15 years. For example, the Northern Ireland Science Park sees Northern Ireland as a major entrepreneurial centre in Europe by 2030. The Northern Ireland region of the Association of British Pharmaceutical Industries aspires to doubling the value of life sciences to the Northern Ireland economy. Our current upper primary pupils will be in their mid-20s by 2030. If they are not involved in science at primary school now sufficiently to build enthusiasm, and they can drop science at the age of 14, they are unlikely to be able to support development and application of science in the province envisaged by these organisations in the 2020s and 2030s. On a personal note, I am now 50 years old, and I plan to retire from primary school teaching in another 10 years. Your tenure may be longer or shorter. It is tempting for the time that we have not to rock the boat, but to let things go on as they are and to rely upon everything just being all right in the end, collect our pensions and move on. But the blatant fact is that it's pointed out even within the narrow scope of the ETI report that has just been published, is that science needs to be developed from the ground up, and it needs to be developed now if our children are to be equipped and ready in time for the economy we want for the future. In short, we can't fudge the issue any longer. Well, we can, but we'll reap the whirlwind. Please forgive the next paragraph. It was written several weeks ago. This institution is currently struggling with the issue of welfare reform. But if this generation of decision makers is willing to take the long-term view, and be willing to sufficiently equip and train this generation's primary educators, not least by setting science back into its once held prominent position within the primary curriculum, then we just may have that highly skilled workforce in 15 years' time to support an economy which develops enough jobs and revenue to make welfare a less significant issue. Today we're here to encourage you to use the influence that you have to make the changes that need to happen, and not to allow this community to miss out on the economic potential that science and STEM industries offer, because it would involve altering this book and supporting those who would be charged to delivering those alterations. Thank you.
Thank you, John. As we just open it up, I'll open up to questions in a moment. I had a couple of questions, one of which I think in terms of the projection of the long-term future, because I suppose a lot of us, the problem sometimes with politics, or indeed anybody such as this, is to look very short-term. And I suppose it's to try to look at a longer-term bit. I suppose to some extent the initial question I had in mind, which was in relation to the long-term impacts, to many ways you've dealt with in your opening statement. We will have the opportunity next week also to have the Education and Training Inspectorate. The one thing that becomes very clear to me, I suppose by way of comment, I'd met yesterday with a representative from Sentinus who would be involved in both primary and secondary school projects as regards, is there obviously is a consistent message of the lack of priority and, I suppose, under budgetary pressures, the reductions in level of funding on promotion, if you like, of STEM subjects, and concerns obviously been raised by ETI. I suppose then the one question I would just want to ask on it is one of the issues which has come up in terms of when you're looking at the world around us, which obviously covers more than just science but covers sort of geography and history as well, is that on the issue of science that there's, I think, described as a low teacher confidence as regards to science issues, that there isn't perhaps a feeling that people are sufficiently equipped. From a practical point of view, what do you think more needs to be done by the department to equip our primary school teachers with the skills to teach science at that level? Because there seems to be a bit of a disconnect at present.
Well, personally, I think they need to ask the primary school teachers for a start, and it's not the primary school teachers that have been asked, to be perfectly honest, by the ETI. That report, we have met a fair number of teachers who did not know about the online process that was available to make their statements known. It landed in principals' offices and didn't get an awful lot further than that, or perhaps involved coordinators who tend to have a little bit more confidence in the subject. The likes of Sentinus, organisations like those are very, very important. It's important that we get them into schools to let children see that there is a future for them in science. I see primary school science, its key role is developing the enthusiasm for the subject. However, what I would not say is that that is a panacea. Sentinus can parachute in, do some wonderful things with the children and move on. What the children need is consistency from the person that they look up to most within the primary school classroom, and that's the primary school teacher. The primary school teacher needs to be equipped properly to deliver the primary school curriculum. Let's not forget that the vast majority of our primary school teachers have been educated in the Northern Ireland primary school system. They themselves, to a large extent, have been turned off science. Many of them do not have O-level standard in sciences. Certainly very, very few of them, approximately 2% of them, will have a pure science degree within the primary school sector. Now that's proved data. I would blow the trumpet for something like SIA, if I can find my book. Yep. They have produced these wonderful documents to deal with deficiencies that teachers might feel in delivering particular branches of science. Here's one on flight. And it basically takes me as a teacher from the beginning of how to teach flight to a Key Stage 2 class to the very end. There are 5 of these documents. 5. That's it. It's excellent. This is the only one of the 5 that I've actually taught, so I can't speak for the rest. It's excellent. But there are 5. That is a woeful, woeful indictment upon the people who are supposed to be upskilling our teachers. It is not their fault that they have come through the Northern Ireland education system and maybe feel very apprehensive about science. We've got to do something about it. We've got to give them the skills. This book that I held up earlier, commonly known as the Golden Book, has relegated science from what used to be a very thick tome to a few hundred words. Now, there is no one at this end of the table who would not feel comfortable about taking those few hundred words and developing something from it. But then again, that's our interest and that's our background. A very large number of teachers, a very high proportion of them, feel very uncomfortable about taking these vague statements and turning them into a coherent and powerful science scheme and line of progression within their schools. This needs to be fleshed out massively. It needs to be very clear on what we want our children to actually know by the end of Key Stage 2. We need to supply a lot more of these to help people to deliver it. And incidentally, of the 5 documents, they are all aimed at Key Stage 2, none of them at Foundation Stage or Key Stage 1. And we need to supply training for people, which is not piecemeal, which is not parachute, but which is actually ongoing. This document refers to CAS a very great deal. If you go to what used to be the Girls' High School, the headquarters in Dundonald, and try and find a CAS officer who is able to help you, you will be going some, because they just don't exist. And the ones that do are helping schools which are in dire straits, not the schools who are really doing their very, very best to deliver the very, very best to their children.
Okay. I mean, as regards to the ETI side of things, and I suppose their outreach within in terms of gathering that information, we'll have the opportunity directly to put those points to them next week. Jonathan, I think you were next.
Thanks, Chair. Ron, you actually hinted at it there that there's a lot of teachers, never mind primary teachers, who just haven't got any science knowledge at all. The other big issue within society, and unfortunately it does actually apply to teachers as well, is just a lack of value when it comes to science as a subject, and more importantly as a career. And it goes beyond science because it also goes into engineering.
Absolutely, yes.
My experience of it, I'm sure, was no different than anyone else. If you said you were going to be a pilot or a doctor or a lawyer, you got huge encouragement. The minute you said you wanted to be an engineer, they sort of looked at you with pity and walked off. But that attitude...
Similar thing happened when I said I was going to be a primary school teacher with a chemistry degree.
Yeah. And that is preeminent within society, never mind within teachers. But obviously those who can influence children the most are probably the primary school teachers. Have you any suggestions as to how we can change that mindset or attitude? Because that goes to the root of the problem. No primary school teacher will upskill themselves in those subjects or even those 5 booklets, pitiful as that might be, if they don't actually value the career choices that are out there for people with science and engineering and other issues.
That's why it's so important for the likes of Sentinus, and there's a gentleman sitting behind me here who has done sterling work. I'm pointing at him, I hope he is there. Yes, he is. Martin's there, who's done sterling work in bringing science experts, people from the real world, into the primary schools. The children get very, very enthusiastic about that. So in the past 4 years, I have had 2 engineers from Harland and Wolff in my school to do particular science projects, and a scientist from Northern Ireland Environment Agency doing work with children. And one of them, thankfully, was a woman as well, which is very, very important because we're missing a out a very large section of our community if we don't include women, and many of our brightest scientists are women. So I think we do need to put in place the situation whereby children can come into contact with scientists. What I would say is that there is no lack of enthusiasm amongst teachers to teach science if they are feeling confident. So we need to give them that confidence. Jim certainly has been involved with training a lot of teachers lately in some resources that he's produced. I have done the same. And basically, if you're offering teachers resources to deliver science, they're going to bite the arm off you. They are very, very keen to get it.
Can I also say that the point you made is absolutely valid? How do we upskill our present primary school teachers? Because we realise it's incumbent upon our education system to support teachers in delivery of primary science. I'm the Vice Principal of an integrated school in North Belfast. Learning habits are forged and formed at primary level. Secondary school, post-primary level consolidate those learning habits. If we don't provide rich opportunities for children to engage in science in a meaningful and in rewarding way, then we run the risk of losing those children in terms of their career paths at a future age or a later stage in their education pathways. Bearing in mind also that at post-primary level you can drop science at age 14. So presently, if our children are not given those rich, rewarding opportunities to become interested in science at primary school, they're very unlikely to choose it when they leave primary school. So you can have a devastating loss of talent of children who just perhaps might have chosen science as an education or a career pathway and didn't get an opportunity to do it. So it's never become more important to reach out to teachers who are more than willing to do just that. But there are a number of reasons, a number of problems that persistently exist in primary schools that prevent them from doing it. If I give some context to some of the work I've been doing, the Primary Science Teaching Trust developed a resource called the Science of the Titanic, which we have been rolling out into schools, all boards, all sectors. So far we've had 205 schools involved in the training. That's a significant number of schools. That's 24% of all the primary schools in Northern Ireland. If you consider the ETI document and evaluation of the world around us, they had 209 schools. They had 35%. We had 24%. While we were training the teachers, we took an opportunity to ask them some questions. We gave them an audit to complete to give us some sense of their perception of teaching and learning in primary schools. And we give them 14 statements, of which I have them here, but I haven't prepared. I have an analysis here, but I don't have a copy for each of you because I wasn't sure of the protocol. But if I could just call out 3 of those 14 statements, it would give you an indication just how concerning we should all be. And you mentioned the point, what should we do to promote primary science? One of the statements was, do you disagree or agree? The leadership team helped promote the teaching of practical investigative science in your school. 69% of the teachers who responded said no, they don't. So at the leadership level, we have a curriculum, Northern Ireland curriculum here, that was promised to provide and deliver a very rich and deep cross-curricular, cross-connective opportunity for children to learn. But as the Vice Principal in primary school and talking to teachers, we are increasingly focused and relentlessly focused on a very narrow part of that curriculum. And that narrow part of that curriculum is literacy, numeracy. And I'm not suggesting for a single second these things are not important, of course important, but the message is being interpreted by schools, and more importantly by the management of schools, that if we get the narrow part of that curriculum correct, then we might be seen to be doing well in the eyes of the ETI. So talking to these 205 schools, the evidence is overwhelmingly telling us that there are real critical problems within schools. One more statement, give me one more opportunity. I feel that science is given less of a priority since the implementation of the revised Northern Ireland curriculum. 86% of those 205 schools agreed with that statement. The third statement, Because of the priority given the other subjects, I feel I do not teach science as well as I would like to. Do you agree or disagree? 84% of the teachers who took part agreed with that statement. So there are real trends and very worrying concerns among the excellent teachers that we have in Northern Ireland. But your point is absolutely right. How do we do that? Well, one of those would be, and John has already mentioned, start listening to teachers. I think the Primary Science Teaching Trust has given, we've provided an opportunity for teachers to respond to us. You talked about the world around us evaluation. Of the 839 schools who were invited to take part in that online audit, 209 schools, that's only 35%, took part in that online audit. They visited 35 schools. I think we have in front of us here a very rich and very relevant and very recent set of data that suggests that not only is the ETI in their evaluation said that there are real concerns, our evaluation suggests that concerns are much deeper than that.
Just one, because I'm conscious of the time here, follow-up. I get what you're saying about the curriculum. I do get that and understand all of that. Is there anything, though, that could be done with regard to the actual training of new teachers to encourage them more in the science and engineering direction? Because I'm acutely aware of what you were saying about the fact that there's so few teachers actually have a science qualification. Is there anything that could be done to improve
things? You must be
things?
aware that until very, very recently, Stranmillis had dropped its requirement for teachers to actually have a specialist subject. They've just reinstated that now, but there's a tranche of teachers coming out who do not have a specialist subject at all, let alone in science. So even the small number that did take science disappeared for a period of time there. So those young people are actually graduating this year. So we've created a hole in the system. Rather than trying to patch up the holes that already exist, we've created another one. I think I'm really, really sorry about this. I'm not sure there's a massive amount that we can do. There are things that we can do. There's things that we must do and should do. But it all goes back in time. We must take the long-term view. The vast majority of our teachers have been educated within our system. They have been educated and missed out on vast quantities of science. We have lots and lots of our children who transfer, and that's another issue, at the age of 11. The ones that go to grammar schools are very likely to study 3 sciences to GCSE and may well score very, very good grades in it. However, we've got to look at what happens beyond that and why are they getting those grades. Are they getting those grades because they're encouraged to get grades, or they get those grades because they're interested in science? Now, that's a totally different question. And I take what you said before. If you have got 3 excellent A-levels in sciences, the temptation is to study medicine. It's big money. It's not to go and study pure and applied chemistry, and with the idea of doing a PhD and going into research. Yet the truth of the matter is, on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph just a few weeks ago was the founder of Randox as one of the richest men in Britain. Now, that's Northern Ireland, but he is the exception. And what we're saying here is we need to strip back, start at the very beginning, forget this idea that science education is only important post-primary. It's vital at primary level. And we've got to sort it out. And if we don't, as I said, someone a bit like me will come back in another 10 years and speak to a group of people a bit like you, and we'll still be talking around it. But not to put too tiny point upon it, it's these young people who will be paying for our retirements. It is these young people who will be paying for our care homes. Now, if they're in low-paid jobs and they're generating little income and very little tax revenue, we've got a problem. Are we prepared to tackle it now, or do we talk around the subject? And I'm afraid past evidence shows that if we bat what you hear back today to Denny, because 2 years ago you did send a letter to Denny asking for their comments on the issue, well, they sent a letter back, which I have right in front of me here, which I could have written with a bucket over my head. I could have written it. It's a civil servant's answer. Everything is fine because it's in the book. It's not. And even when you read carefully the ETI document, you see that there are major, major concerns about science in there that we should sit up and take notice of. Must sit up and take notice of. Because this report is a very fine report. I've put it in writing in front of you there, but it is the wrong report. It is examining the world around us. It is not examining science within the world around us. And I'm very sorry, people who are not confident in delivering science will deliver the world around us through history and geography and the minimum amount of science possible because they don't feel secure in it.
I think, Cathy, did you want that?
Only that you're in a very, I feel, from the point of view of the trust, you're in a very strong position to get some of the support that you need to put into place some implementation to support the lack of confidence in teachers. We're an educational charity who support outstanding teachers of primary science, and Northern Ireland is the jewel in our crown. We've got more fellows per head over here than we have in the rest of the UK. And we're working very hard as a trust, as college director, support this area to actually broaden out and go beyond Belfast and Antrim. And this year we're appointing a fellow in Enniskillen and in the Coleraine area. So you've got a significant amount of expertise already. There's 17 fellows over here. There's the support of the trust to finance the quality that is already there, which is, you know, Jim's project just escalated almost out of control, really, for the demand was so great. We've been financing Jim to come out of school every couple of weeks to deliver these programmes, and then people have gone away with the resource to actually use, and the feedback is they are using it. And that's because the fellows here know the system, know what teachers need, and we've got future plans to give them what they need, basically. So, you know, all I'd like to say is that there is a fairly good structure over here that, you know, could really help to get that message out and support other teachers.
Maybe just make a comment and ask you maybe to comment on it. I mean, it does strike me that one of the other implications you indicated, if you like, trying to break the cycle that's been there, particularly as we take a long-term view. There's also very long-term implications and problems that are being created, I suppose, in terms of breaking a sort of a gender cycle as well, which is obviously in terms of science, and particularly Jonathan mentioned in engineering, that traditionally there's been a relatively low involvement and maybe limited opportunities for females in terms of science. I know you've mentioned, John, that many of our finest scientists are females, but proportionately they've tended to be relatively low. And it strikes me that a lot of people in different professions, if you ask them sort of what first got them interested, it's quite often the role model example of a teacher that has taken them down that route. And I suppose if you think about it, particularly at the primary school level, where the vast majority of primary school teachers are female, the opportunity for that positive female role model who would then have a particular involvement in science, if that's missed out, then that's in many ways feeling a certain number of pupils in general, but particularly perhaps failing to have that opportunity to inspire females to see this as a role which is very much catered for them. And we're likely then to perpetuate that underrepresentation of females unless we do tackle the primary school. But I appreciate that's more of a comment than a question, but is there major gender implications if we fail to grasp this as well?
Sorry, Leslie, do you want to speak as a female here? I better shut up and let you.
I speak as a female here and reiterate something that has already been said. You were asking about teacher training, you were asking about possibilities for teachers here to have CPD. At the minute, the only science CPD being offered to teachers here is under the auspices of the Primary Science Teaching Trust and the National Science Learning Centre, which is based in York. There's nothing being offered by our own department. When we offer courses to teachers, they are full within 2 days, and we usually have a waiting list. The National Science Learning Centre offered courses last year. We put on 3 courses. We had to repeat each of those 3 times, and each of them was a 3-day course. The majority of teachers coming to those courses are primary teachers who have no science background, and the majority are female as well. When they come back to us on day 3, there's a 2-month period in between. When they come back to us on day 3, they're different teachers. They're full of enthusiasm. They're able to tell us that what we have shown them, what we have offered them, they have put into use, and they have seen the impact it has had on their class already. And they're able to show us just how positive the training has been and how they intend to take it further. The problem is that once they leave the courses, there's no background, there's no backing for them. They have nobody to contact for information or for help. And the teachers will use the CPD when they're given it. Part of the problem the teachers are facing is that if you're a Key Stage 2 teacher, you have one page, one A4 page, that is for 3 years teaching in 4 subjects. And that is all the guide that they are being given. 3 years, 4 subjects: science, geography, history and technology. And these are extremely vague sentences and statements, and that is all that they have to go on. There are things called the lines of progression out there, but they're not statutory. But if you give them to teachers, it breaks down step by step the progression from foundation up to upper Key Stage 2, and the teachers actually find that useful. So to have something like that as a baseline would be a starting point to helping our teachers. But then they need the CPD to show what that looks like in the classroom. But give it to the teachers and they will run with it and come back and tell you how effective it is.
Okay, thank you. Trevor, I think you're next.
Thanks for your presentation. We've heard a lot of this before, but it's nice to have it clarified in this way. You know, you haven't missed and hit the wall. John, you have a chemistry degree, yep. And you admit that would be unusual in a primary school teacher. I mean, if I can't help thinking if I was a newly qualified with a first-class degree in a science subject, and I wanted to use my skills to full advantage, it would either be in industry or else at the secondary level, I would have thought. So I suppose the question is, I think you've almost answered it here, you don't need a science degree to teach science at the level of the world around us, sure you don't?
Absolutely not.
No.
Absolutely not. I came into school teaching and into primary school teaching in particular because I enjoyed working with children, end off. I was also one of Thatcher's children. I was graduating under Mrs. Thatcher. There was plenty of money to do a PhD in those days in chemistry, physics as well, and to actually train for secondary teaching. But that's not what I wanted to do. So I wanted to take my science into primary school and to hopefully help others around me. Well, I suppose I didn't think about it at that stage, but I thought of inspiring children to science, latterly thinking about inspiring teachers to science. However, if I just sort of paint a very, very brief picture, in the 25 years that I was teaching within primary schools up to this stage, I have been a geography coordinator, an ICT coordinator, and a maths coordinator, because I was waiting for the present science coordinator to move on. There's not necessarily a utilisation of skills and the awarding of a post within a school.
I must confirm, when I was at primary school, which isn't yesterday, I must admit now.
Had gravity been invented?
We didn't.
Discovered, I should say.
Oh, well, Sputnik hadn't gone up. I'll not be any more precise. But I mean, we didn't do science at primary level. We didn't do history or geography or technology. I'm not quite sure, looking back, what we actually did. We didn't do any of those specialisations. We learned how to spell, I suppose, basically, and add, and I can still do mental arithmetic with the best of them, you know. But we've moved a long way from that. It just seems to me perhaps we've taken the wrong course, you know, because I don't see the relationship between the science subjects and history and geography, frankly. I I don't know what the rush would be to teach children up to age 10 history, frankly. Instinctively, I would have thought that your science subjects would be more practical, might engage them more, actually, if you can develop their enthusiasm. And we've been to the PT Scientist of the Year and so on. We've seen the work of scientists. And the enthusiasm of the children at no age is fantastic, you know. So it shouldn't be a hard task. But the teachers clearly are being put off by the fact that the whole world around us thing is too wide. So they take you've said so, they take the easy route, you know. I went to school recently and taught them for an hour and a half about Egypt. It wasn't difficult. I haven't got a degree, you know, just a few photographs and a couple of trips. But science would leave me breathless, you know. I mean, is it a case that we need more specialisation even at primary level?
Some of the suggestion from our colleagues in England is that every school should have access to a specialist scientist within their staff, even at primary level. As far as the other subjects concerned, history, geography, RE, English, it's part of weaving a very rich tapestry of learning for children. And the idea behind the world around us was to, if you like, inculcate science within children's everyday experience. As they learned about the past, as they learned about the environment around them and so on, to see where science had an impact upon that. Unfortunately, it has been a double-edged sword because, yes, you can inculcate science into all of those, into that tapestry, but you could actually just as easily hide it behind the other things. And that's what's happening far, far too often. The problems that we are facing are unique to us in certain respects, but in others not completely. I would draw your attention to the Aspires document, King's College, and I could just read to you. This is, Peter, is really in reply to what you said. STEM plays a crucial role in national wealth creation, but evidence suggests that the pool from which scientists are drawn remains too narrow, especially in the physical sciences, and that's another story as well. For instance, even highly able individuals, notably women, working class and some minority ethnic learners, can find it difficult to envisage themselves as science people, particularly when their backgrounds do not fit the public profile of the wider science workforce. A shared policy commitment to science for all could help attract more diverse talent to help STEM fulfil its national economic remit. I can understand how you can go to a Scientific event and see lots of enthusiastic children. We were recently at an event for the Guinness Book of Records where we held the world's largest science experiment. And the enthusiasm was bursting out of the children. But that's not where they do their learning. The learning's every Monday morning, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday in school with the teacher, and that's where it's got to be built.
I only mention scientists because they are so good at it and the limited way that they have to operate. But they do demonstrate a very rich vein of enthusiasm amongst children at the age you're talking about for science subjects.
Part of the reason why teachers are teaching a lot of geography and history is that world around us is taught through topics, and many schools, because I did some research as well, are still using the topics that were there before the revised curriculum, because we were doing science as a topic on its own. So they're still using the topics that they were used to, that they have resources for and that they know how to teach, and they are geography and history heavy. So that is why there is so little science being taught.
I think we need to, redefine what a good school is and the characteristics of what a good school is. And the responsibility of that is to be shared among all sectors, but particularly the ETI, who I believe have identified the characteristics of a good school through a very narrow prism. If 69% of the teachers who completed training this year tell us that there is no support from leadership, then we can assume and deduct from that is that the leadership interpret that as science is less important than other subjects. And the reason they come to that conclusion is because we know that the ETI define a good school by a very, very narrow perspective. And science is not one of them.
Okay, I'll bring in,
So if a school is keen, to prove to its governors, its parents, its pupils that we are a good school, then there are a number of things they need to get right, but science isn't one of them.
okay, briefly, Trevor.
What level of scientific knowledge do you need to teach 8-year-olds science?
You don't need a massive amount if you are given the resources to deliver it. But a lot of people within primary school, they just look at you whenever I did a lesson on Bernoulli's principle the other day. It's the simplest thing. The kids loved it. There were Coke cans flying all around the place. Super stuff. They all know how a plane flies now and how it stays in the air.
If teachers know one thing...
I told some teachers about
Sorry,
that.
John. If teachers know one thing, it's pedagogy. How do children learn? Once they understand that, then they can apply it across all subjects. We know the research that shows us how children learn has changed unrecognisably from when I trained as a teacher. Our understanding of how the brain works has changed unrecognisably. How children learn. Teachers understand that. It's not necessarily the subject. It's creating the space and time, the professional development opportunities and the resources to allow competent and very dedicated and enthusiastic teachers to deliver that. I don't have a maths background, and yet I deliver maths. 30% of my curriculum will be maths. Nor have I a literacy background, but 30% of my curriculum delivery will be literacy. Nobody questions my competency and my qualifications to do that, and I don't think we should question a teacher who's non-science specialist competency to deliver that. What they need is support from the leadership team in the school. They need support from the ETI, and it's a cross. This is not a teacher issue. This is a cross-sector issue, and we need to be singing from the same hymn sheet, because ultimately the only people who are suffering here are the children who do not choose science as an education or career pathway because the science experience they receive at primary school is not good. Why would they choose it?
Okay, 3 more questions, 4 actually more questions. If members can keep them reasonably brief because we're running a little bit behind time. Robin, I think you were next.
Chair, can I thank John and his team for coming up today and for their obvious enthusiasm for what they actually want to do. My question really, Chair, has been answered by Cathy and by Leslie. It was around the infrastructure that we would have and the very positive picture that Cathy painted on the competence here, and unfortunately the negative picture that Leslie painted around it. But perhaps, Chair, when the members have left, we could maybe discuss the case study that John outlined on the Needles project, because I think that would be very concerning.
I think one of the things arising out of this, and we'll also have the opportunity with ETI coming as to what additional action that we take in relation. Sandra, I think you were next.
I was, thank you, Chair. But my question's really been answered as well, so I'll not take up any more time.
Much, I'm sorry.
No, don't apologise.
No, I mean,
That's good.
you've been very comprehensive in covering a lot of the issues on it, so it's perhaps not unnatural. I know certainly one of the questions I had you'd covered before really I got to it in that regard, and I think that's very good in regard.
I think what we do need to do is just keep banging on about it, and so.
Okay, we have 2 other questioners, Nelson and then Maeve.
Thanks.
Yes.
It was just that point that Trevor was raising, and maybe a different angle on. If you are teaching, say, flight, as an example, does that not include the science, the history and the geography in that, the history of how flight was invented or whatever, and the science and geography I'm sure comes in some way, or if you were doing how Belfast gets its water supply would be science and history, and they should really, I suppose, be all together in these things. Is that the theory behind?
If you open this book, which is flight, okay, I taught the lessons from this. That's why I'm so familiar with it. It starts off looking at bird migration, and then it talks about the history of flight as well. So your history, geography, everything is in there. The problem is, if you give a topic to a school teacher who's not feeling confident with science, they are quite capable of developing the geography aspect, the history aspect. They'll make sure there's literacy and numeracy in there as well.
The best outcome is if they're all integrated.
Yes, but if the science is diluted, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have been given a system which, at primary level, is charged with developing investigative skills. But unfortunately, we're losing a lot of the knowledge base as well. So I had a group of 40 P7 children earlier this year at my school doing a technology competition. They were actually doing Jim's Titanic stuff. They were from 8 different schools. 3 children knew how to begin to make a circuit in P7. Now that's a little concerning. They just didn't know where to begin. Now, yes, we need to have investigation skills, but we also need to have some knowledge base there as well. And the Golden Booklet doesn't leave an awful lot of room for knowledge base. So, to me, and this has nothing to do with what I've said here this morning, to me, primary school is about building a massive amount of enthusiasm. We have children who bounce into us at foundation stage, and we need to tap into that, because you don't necessarily find that same enthusiasm children entering into the secondary system. Now is the time to do it.
Okay, then finally, Maeve.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Just, I suppose, 2 points really. Your analysis would suggest that vast amount of primary school teachers have missed out almost on science. And I'm just, for my own clarification, can there be a similar case made for the likes of ICT? I'm thinking specifically, just, I'll refer to yourselves, but I'm thinking specifically when we look at ICT, and the sad fact is that it's 10, 15, maybe 20 years out of date in relation to what's actually been taught in schools, and the whole debate around coding, for example. So I'm just wondering, in your analysis on that, is there a similar argument that can be made there? Because I know, just conclude on this, that the local business community and my own constituency in Derry came together and actually paid for a number of the teachers to look at coding in schools, and I suppose on the basis of its link with the economy in terms of that skills mismatch. So maybe the first part, can we make a similar case?
I think, you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said that, what we're teaching at schools is somewhat behind what the knowledge of the children already is. Because when it comes to ICT, children are very largely self-educated. So quite a few of them can strip way beyond what the teacher actually knows themselves, because they're constantly using it from no age. We're having to teach P1 children how to use a mouse, because they don't use a mouse at home. Everything is touchscreen. They're all completely familiar with cutting-edge technology, and they're way beyond what we can supply them in school. Science is slightly different because it involves investigative skills and processes which do need to be taught. It's very rare that you find someone that can naturally take it on board. It does need to be taught, and you need to provide the context in which you can teach that. And the context, I feel, needs to be exciting and engaging, because that's what young children want. It's the way they learn best, when it's exciting and engaging. So I think there is a slight difference between the two.
Chair, to yourself, in terms of the skills mismatch issue, because you're picking up on your point that this isn't just a primary school issue. And I know that, for example, one of the conversations, again, that we were having with the University of Ulster at Magee was around not just an increase in numbers, but the types of courses and how you link those with the economy. So I'm wondering, listening to what you're saying in terms of the challenge in primary sector, but is there enough done in linking science, linking STEM with the economy, and perhaps maybe even your thoughts on why the 26 county model there seems to be more uptake from an outsider looking in? I'm just interested in that.
I'm not in a position to answer that.
No. But the thing about the skills that we're talking about, what we think of as the science skills are actually cross-curricular skills. So it is the skills which the children need, but science is an ideal vehicle for teaching those skills. But once they have the skills such as questioning, observing, drawing conclusions, management issues, etc., they can apply those right across the curriculum. But it's not purely knowledge-based, because if we want to find out anything now, we've been talking about ICT, children just need to press a couple of buttons and they have the answer to any question within a couple of seconds. But they need to have the skills to apply what they have learnt. And as I say, science is a perfect vehicle for teaching those skills, which then can be used right across the curriculum. So it's not purely knowledge-based.
There's something also intrinsically beautiful about science, and when we spend a disproportionate amount of our time expecting our children to describe the world and not necessarily attempt to explain it, there's something that we miss out when our children don't have a natural wonderment and awe about the world. And as a non-science specialist, one of the greatest joys I sometimes have is when I do science with my children and they look at me and ask why that is, and I tell them, I've no idea, but isn't it just brilliant? And something in that sparks and ignites a natural curiosity about the world around them. And it's that immeasurable, innate curiosity about the world that we need to fire among our young children.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Folks, that's been a very useful session. I suppose the important thing is actually, as you say, to ensure that perhaps in 10 years' time that your successors and our successors are not here sitting with the same problem in that regard. So I'd like to thank you for your attendance today. Could I suggest to committee we will need to take a look when the witnesses have left us what further action we take, and there's a reminder obviously that there is the session that we're having next week with ETI, so there may well be some of the actions that will flow more directly whenever we finish that. But in particular, I think in your packs at page, I think it's 28, there's a series of questions which have been posed by our colleagues here in the Trust. Because yes, for starters, I appreciate the caveat that was issued earlier on about simply seeking a response of department, but I suppose particularly to try and inform us ahead of next week. I think if we seek the information, at least to forward those to department to see if we can get answers back by the 3rd, it may well inform our deliberations next week whenever we had members agree first of all with that. Okay. Thank you then for your attendance today.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Right? You have been. You're very kindly.
Okay, folks. Just as regards any future actions, now we've got next week the ETI are coming in front of us, and suppose that hopefully we'll get sort of a complete picture on it. Now, it may be best in terms of whatever major actions we intend to take. May await sort of that after that evidence session and try and take it in the round. But do anybody have any suggestions ahead of that of particular actions they would like to see taken, or are they happy to wait until next week until we have both the sessions?
I just think, Chair, there's an ongoing issue which education is not getting on top of, and that is how do you get through to the primary school teachers the importance of science and engineering? Because they're the enthusiasts, let's be honest about it. Those are the ones who direct children in their career choices eventually. If you're sending out a message that
it's good to see it's not just the people in the public gallery who certain messages need to be given to, whatever as regards mobile phones. But
thankfully not me this time. But I had to say, if you send that subtle messages out, and I'm not saying anybody's getting up there and saying science was a terrible career choice, but very subtle messages are sent out by attitudes of teachers to children. It's how do you correct that? Do you correct it through the initial training, or do you?
It also seems to be that there's a bit of, from what they're saying, and it seems to be at least sort of training and supply of information seems to be the key of this.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a vicious circle, which is that if you have teachers brought up in a system where there was perhaps a limited amount of emphasis on science, when they come to teach a collective subject which includes science, will naturally be the case, I think, probably for all of us, that if you're looking to speak on the subject, you go to those areas which you're familiar with and perhaps then have a degree of concentration on that side. Trevor?
Yeah, it's always a joy to have the inspectorate here. Depressing kind of a joy, but it's a joy. I'm just looking at the first three recommendations here for the Department of Education to encourage and support science and technology strand of WAU, to investigate how primary schools can be supported, and to re-emphasise the importance of WAU. This is really incisive stuff, you know. I mean, I could have written that, you know. We're not inspectors. There's nothing concrete in it at all.
Okay, folks.
Must do better. You know.
Could I suggest, I mean, if people give a wee bit of thought over the next week, because we will be having ETI, both in terms of, I mean, I think sort of some of the things that have been said today are good food for thought, for questions for ETI, but I think we probably need to give a bit of thought as to how we take forward some of those issues and how we press on some of those issues. And, you know, I think there are significant issues that have been raised. I suppose the problem is finding solutions may not be quite as easy as simply seeing where the problems are, as in many things in life. But I think we need, if we have a short session once we've had ETI, and see whether there's either anybody additional that we need to get beyond that, or whether indeed particular courses of action I think would prove useful. Okay, sorry, Sandra, but
yeah, I just think it all comes back to, I suppose, parental pressure as well is probably helpful, because at the end of the day, parents want their young people to grow up, get a decent job, and it's understanding where science fits into that. And as some of them said, you know, veterinary, doctor, you know, that's the usual career choices if you're doing science. But if, you know, our biggest industry in Northern Ireland is the food industry, and you'll need a certain amount of science at that, no matter what level you're in that career.
Well,
you know, and so
for some of those careers areas, it's also an issue of profile in that regard, because you're right in terms of part of the things is that there will be particular professions that people think of, and possibly in terms of the numbers involved in those professions, are a lot smaller than perhaps some other areas where it isn't sort of perhaps so consciously in the public eye, and maybe that's also an element of things.
I suppose what we're really getting at here, Peter, is, you know, is there a lack of engagement between industry and science careers and actual schools, and specifically primary schools, you know, because that's the key. And even the teachers, you know, should there be something in the inspectorate which goes, well, here's one of your key indicators, how are you actually engaging with industry and other, you know, businesses out there, because there's nothing there. You know, a school can sit in splendid isolation and do absolutely nothing and get a pat on the back for it.
take the words out of my mouth. Yeah.
Well, not with agreement. We'll move on for the moment on it, but we'll be coming back to this next week. We'll move on to the next item of correspondence. I just a couple of items will perhaps want to just highlight. First of all, at 6.7 on the school starting age, we've obviously got some responses from the Minister. Could I suggest, obviously this has been an issue which has been raised by groups such as the Parents Out Loud and ATL. Could we suggest probably we forward those to those groups for information? I suspect we'll be hearing more from them in relation to that. Remind members, I think, at 6.9, there's a reception next Wednesday between 2 and 4, which would dovetail neatly in with presumably the completion of the committee meeting. You'll probably have a bit of time for a little bit of lunch afterwards. But after, you can then go to the Every School is a Good School reception, which is going to take place in the Long Gallery. And the Department of Education has provided a list of schools that are attending. In terms of, are there any other items under the correspondence that members want to raise? And ask members then, if you're happy then, that we deal with them as per the cover sheet on pages 173 to 175. Members are agreed? Okay.
I see the invitation to Derry Connolly here and the event afterwards. Celebration of shared education. Are we going to have enough members to dignify this occasion? Because I have to come back early, I must say.
Well, perhaps if we can check up with that, I appreciate not every member's here at the moment. Perhaps the clerk could check in terms of availability of that. I mean, I'm sure those of us that will bring dignity to it, but whether, as you say, whether we bring dignity in sufficient numbers.
I couldn't think of another word.
Yeah, no, probably a very appropriate word, to be fair, Trevor, in that regard. Okay, and yes, certainly we'll check that, because obviously we want to ensure that, from that point of view, that the committee is well represented and from that side of things. Okay, we'll be moving to private session shortly, but under any other business, does anybody have any other business they wish to raise at item 7? If not,
I suppose just before we move on, I'd hoped that I could have raised that issue about the 7-week period, I think it is, when children are sent off to study leave, basically.
this was raised. I think Robin raised it in your absence.
Get anything back on it is really what I'm asking.
No responses yet, but I think that was only, wasn't last week, might have been the week before, was it? I seem to recall. So they would just be replying now. Right. So we will follow up with them and seek an answer.
It's just because I wanted to know what the department guidelines and that was. I wouldn't have thought that would have taken them that long to get back on us on that one, because every school seems to do its own thing, which is a bit worrying.
Yes, well, that's it. Well, obviously, Nelson?
Separate issue.
Okay, if we're finishing up with that, yes, Nelson.
Yeah. There's a situation that arisen where this year the girls' model and boys' model schools are both oversubscribed. And those are the only two controlled schools, secondary schools in North Belfast. I don't know the situation with the two Ashfields in the east of the city.
My understanding is, I was certainly informed yesterday by somebody that there's been an issue in the schools in Ashfield, and particularly in East Belfast, that there appears to be a problem as well on that side of it.
So you have oversubscribed schools, and there's clear evidence from the primary schools that numbers are increasing at that level, and that will filter through then to the secondary schools as well. Now, the parents whose children couldn't or haven't been admitted were given a list of schools in Belfast where there are vacancies. But 7 of those were Roman Catholic maintained schools. One was an Irish medium and one was an integrated school. So we've got a situation where clearly...
I think Trevor's about to suggest which direction they could go in.
Well, it's Malone College.
All right, no, just go ahead.
It's a bit of a journey.
A bit of a journey, yeah.
Yeah. So there is a difficulty there. Could we write to the department and maybe raise the issue again about the Ashfields then in these?
Well, I think yeah, particularly there's a broader issue which seems to be I'm aware of being told, whether it's anecdotally or not, which may be a story that will break reasonably soon, that I know that some of those in the East Belfast situation, in terms of, I suppose, well, it's the control alternatives, have been then given a range of choices, some of which, for somebody living in Belfast, stretch to Coleraine and Ballycastle, which seems to be would be quite a invigorating journey in the morning, put it that way, on that side of things. There's a broader question, it seems to me. I mean, I think we can ask them specifically about the situation that seems to have arisen in Belfast this year, because it seems to be both in East Belfast and North Belfast. There does seem to be a wider context, and I've seen this happen at both secondary and primary school level, which is a concern that there seems to be at times a rigidity in terms of intake of numbers, that there doesn't appear to be a great deal of flexibility within the department in terms of variation on numbers. But the other factor as well seems to be that in various sectors, there's a very slowness to react to changing demographics in terms of numbers within an area. And in my experience, what tends to be the case is that the department may well eventually reach a situation that 2, 3, 4 years down the line, they will agree a variation in schools' numbers because of demographic pressure. But it seems to me those are things which, if you're talking particularly at the secondary school level, and even to a lesser extent within the primary sector, which are very predictable that a problem is coming down the line 2 or 3 years in advance, and there seems to be very slow reaction and an unwillingness, if you like, of the department to shift on some of those issues. So I don't know if we can maybe highlight those, if you like, both the particular situation that seems to have risen this year in Belfast, but I've seen it happen in, so obviously, my own constituency, and I'm sure maybe others will have found that as well. Now, there's other parts of the country where there's a considerable amount of spare capacity. We all know that. but it seems that there are various demographic spikes at times seem to be happening, and there's a little bit concerning that those don't appear at times to be particularly anticipated whenever the demographics of the figures should be relatively easily be recognisable. Even down to the fact that if you know, for example, in an area, if you take on the primary school level on it, that the previous year or a particular year there is a high level of uptake or pressure on nursery school places and there's a vast oversubscription there, it shouldn't really be rocket science to then realise that the following year that there's going to be potential pressures in P1 if you know what the demographic figures are in those bits. And I appreciate there is a situation where people, where the department will say, and I can understand this, to say, well, really, instead of going to such and such a school, there is a nearby alternatives, and that is fair enough on it. But if you have a situation where the actual situation is that the nearest alternatives are a vast distance away and not particularly practical for parents, then
if you've closed, I'm not familiar with the details of the Ashfield situation in East Belfast, but if you've closed all of the other secondary schools in the constituency or in the area, and you then are left with one girls' school and one boys' school, it's pretty obvious that there's going to be an issue. And I think that the other factor you mentioned there about demographics is, in inner city areas where you've seen population decline, you're now seeing population growth, because you have all these brownfield sites that are now being built on at last. Yes. And the result of that is you're going to have more children coming through automatically.
Trevor, I just wondered what the situation would be about enrolment in BRA.
Well, many of those children may not wish to go there. They may be for secondary school. But again, the BRA, you've got children coming from Ballyclare everywhere to.
Yeah, I don't know whether
it's very, very wide.
I don't know if they have any spare capacity or not, but the obstacle is transfer test.
But again, if children have choice, parental choice, may well be that they would prefer their child to go to the model school.
Well, yes, but
I suppose I mean it's wrong if both of you could just speak through the chair rather than if you want to have a private conversation, I'm sure you're welcome to go outside over. But Jonathan,
on a completely different issue now.
Maybe we just if we get this one completed first. So, can we write to the department, I suppose, to clarify the situation at least as regards the current situation in Belfast? But I think also if we got a bit more guidance on what processes they have to try and, I think we'd put a little bit of concern over the processes in terms of assessing how demographics impact, because it strikes me that from experience it is very much a slow-turning tanker at best in that regard, and I'm not quite sure why, in terms of short-term variations, that there can't be a bit more flexibility, but also be that it can't be foreseen a little bit more quickly and reacted to a little bit more quickly than appears to be the case.
There is also an equality issue there in that there are clearly no spaces in the controlled sector, but clearly an over-provision in the maintained sector. I think that needs an issue that needs to be looked at maybe.
Also, members are well aware, the committee's position paper on area planning will be debated on Monday the 1st, and
there will be an opportunity.
Well, to talk about the policy issues.
I should obviously remind members obviously that's been scheduled for I think 2 hours on.
It has
on Monday, so you can. That's your homework for this week. You can go and prepare your speeches for Monday, and encourage all your colleagues as well from other walks of life to speak on that. Jonathan, you had a separate issue as well?
Yeah, it's a completely separate issue. There was an issue which was raised at the All-Party Group on Autism, and it's around this issue of access to child psychology services. Now, I think we're all aware that the boards, while there was this sort of hiatus around introducing the Education Authority, they were all run down, and especially these type of services. I think it's relevant now to ask the appropriate question now that the authority's up and running. Is there any plans to maybe not enhance those services, but to ensure that there's at least a geographic spread of it across Northern Ireland, so we don't have this postcode lottery that seems to exist at present?
Yeah, we can follow up on that.
Yes, Chair. I think also we'll do that. See what the Education Authority says, but to remind members of the ongoing review of allied health professionals and multidisciplinary support teams. I suspect the answer we get might touch on that, but right, EA in those terms.
No, it's important. It strikes me that one of the major advantages should be, if we're moving to a single authority, is that areas where there's been a degree of a patchiness, shall we say, in terms of that there isn't a uniformity across the way in terms of service, that depending upon where you live, what your opportunities are. It's one of the areas which should be very much tackled by the Education Authority to suggest. I'm not saying with budgetary constraints everything will be perfect in that regard, but at least if we can ensure that, or they can ensure there's a level of uniformity on these things, at least it should mean that there's that equality across the board. Okay. If there's no other business, now that we have, I should say, while I'm mentioning the date and time of the next meeting will be 10 o'clock in the Senate chamber.
10 o'clock?
10 o'clock, yeah.
Right. Oh, that's all right. It's
Okay.
What is that an error then that's on
Sorry,
the 10:50?
does it say 10:50 on the system?
All right, okay.
That's a typo, is it?
I'm afraid so, yes.
You wouldn't,
I like the idea of it.
you wouldn't,
False expectations.
Jonathan, yeah, you'll not be able to get lying that morning. Yes, you win the prize for spotting the deliberate error. As Captain Mannering said, we were wondering who would spot that deliberate mistake. But we do have, before we even conclude the formal meeting, there's one item then we just want to move into private session for, which is the draft work programme. I'd refer